Our guest today is Father Christopher Heller, newly ordained June of 2022. Stay with us, please. Hello and welcome to Personally Speaking. I'm your host, Msgr Jim Lisante. Delighted that Father Christopher Heller joins me now. Father Chris was ordained to the priesthood on June 18th of 2022 in Rockville Centre Diocese, New York. He's currently an associate pastor at St. Dominic's Church in Oyster Bay, New York. Father Christopher is from Bay Shore, Long Island, and he's a graduate of Chaminade High School in Mineola and the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He attended St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers. He's here with us today to talk about his life, his vocation to the priesthood. Joining me now, I'm so pleased to welcome to Personally Speaking the newly ordained Father Christopher Heller. I'd like to welcome Father Christopher Heller on Personally Speaking and begin, Father, just by saying congratulations on your kind of recent ordination.
Thank you. Yeah, it is pretty recent, about maybe is it 4 months? Very recent, yeah.
4 months already. Now, I am coming from a slightly different perspective of 42 years.
Right.
So I want to talk a little bit about this. Every year we try to have a priest on who was recently ordained. Last year he was from the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. I got to ask you, when a guy embraces the vocation of priesthood, the natural question that we get all the time, and you'll get it for the rest of your life, is when did you know you wanted to be a priest, or did you always know you wanted to be a priest, and why are you a priest? When people ask you that question, how do you handle it?
Yeah, it's funny because I do get that question often, especially right after the ordination. I mean, it was obviously the latest question to ask me, but it's funny because obviously I'm not very old. I'm 27 years old, probably one of the youngest priests right now. And so obviously it's not like I had this long life. I wasn't really working. I entered the seminary right out of college. But yeah, I would say that it was really just gradual. I think that's how God works, really. It wasn't like I had a moment where I knew that I was called to be a priest. Right. But I would say it was really just in high school, I had thought about it. Even in 7th and 8th grade when I was altar serving, it was the Mass. The priests I knew, I found their lives to be attractive. I found the Mass to be something beautiful. And I think it was probably when I was a junior in college when it really became all those little moments that kind of weaved throughout my life. It became clear, I think at that point, that they were all kind of converging at one big step, and that was the priesthood.
As you say that, reminding me that I think probably the most instrumental part of the vocation process for me was the experience of the priests in my parish growing up. Monsignor Joe Smith, Father Charlie Murphy, Frank Dobson, people like that, John Seidenschwang. Who were the priests that you looked at and you said, that looks to me like a meaningful life. I'm impressed with the way they live their vocation. Who were the priests that touched you, and what gifts did they have that made you say, I want to be more like them?
Yeah, there were a number of them, really. From my earliest days, there was a Father James Reynolds, who was a priest of Brooklyn, who was a friend of my aunt's and became a family friend. And I knew him when I was about 7 years old. So he was probably the first priest that I knew. I grew up in Syosset, St. Edward's, the Confessor. So Father Tom Fusco was my childhood pastor. He was a huge example and influence on me. Great man, great priest.
Yes.
Then I went to Chaminade High School. So all the Marianist brothers, it was kind of like a team effort there. They each had like different gifts or ways that they served the church that really influenced me. And then when I was at Catholic University for college, there were a bunch of different priests there. I think Father Frank, he was our Knights of Columbus chaplain. I worked at the Basilica there for a few years. So Father Michael Weston was a priest I worked for. He was at the Diocese of Arlington. So it was a bunch of different priests from different dioceses, different religious orders. It was, I think it was just God who spoke to me in these many different priests.
Now, folks always wonder, and I guess it is an important thing about the family of origin. When you were growing up, we're talking to Father Christopher Heller here. When you were growing up, did you have a family for which the church and the practice of the faith were pretty regular, pretty steady, pretty important, or not?
It was kind of both. I feel like we were just maybe like the modern type of Catholic family where, we went to church, I think, more often than just Christmas or Easter, but it wasn't always something that was regular. So in that way was, I guess, unique. I think a lot of there were either guys in seminary who kind of found their vocations on their own or had these very, very Catholic families. And we were Catholic, but not always, the most devout. And
Yeah.
it actually was a huge part of my vocation. I think it's just the unique way that God works.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in seventh or eighth grade, my parents divorced when we were in Syosset.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was that moment that kind of became instrumental for me. I kind of saw the consoling parts of our faith. I kind of discovered, that Christ himself was kind of getting me through those days, going to mass on Sunday. Sometimes I would even walk on my own and go. And yeah, so that was kind of a huge impact, I think. So in that way, even me being in seminary actually made my family more practicing. So
Isn't that
it's kind of
great?
amazing
Yeah.
how that works.
You probably know him. Father James Hansen has been a guest on the program, and he talked about the fact that when his parents split, he was going to St. Catherine of Siena School in Franklin Square, and the pastor, Monsignor Grunwald, came by, took him out of class, and just said, "I know you're going through a hard time, and if you ever need to talk, I'm here." And he said, more than anything else, that just touched him so deeply that the priest was conscious of the struggle that he'd be going through as the child of parents who were divorcing and was there for him at a critical moment of his life. And I think it's important to say that because I think some people just presume that every priest or religious comes from an intact family where it's church every week and very Catholic. And I think yours is probably closer to the truth for many people in terms of the challenge of living a normal life. And out of that normal life comes a vocation which is your own. Now, let me ask you this. You're newly ordained. Do you know what you're doing yet?
I don't know. And some days when I think that I do have the hang of it, and then something comes up and I'm like, oh, I guess I have to look back and kind of ask some more questions. But, I have a unique assignment. I'm at St. Dominic in Oyster Bay,
Mm-hmm.
which is a unique parish in that you would know this. It has the parish itself,
Right.
and then in an elementary school and a high school. So kind of learning to do a couple of different things at once. So I'm glad I had this summer to kind of learn to be a priest before the high
Mm-hmm.
school stuff started. But I think I'm getting the hang of it.
Now, when you have a place like that, are you active in the high school and as well as the grammar school? Do you go and
Yeah, I would
visit
be
them?
considered, I guess, the chaplain. Usually the associate here is the chaplain. And then I teach two sophomore theology classes too. So
Okay.
it's fun.
No, that's a great opportunity to reach
Yeah.
young people, no doubt about it. Now, you know and I know, though, that most people in the parish are going to come to know you and form whatever opinion they have of the kind of priest you are on the basis of that 10, 15, 20-minute homily, depending on how long you go on Sunday. But what did you know about preaching going in? How good a preacher are you? How do you prepare to give a homily that you hope will touch people for the rest of their week?
Yeah, we had a great homiletics professor, Father Richard Veris, at the seminary that I went to in
Okay.
Dunwoody. He kind of focused the whole course on this book, Why Preach, by Father Peter John Cameron, which was a great book.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I find, and I've gone to masses that you celebrated before, Monsignor, because I have family in Massapequa.
Ah.
So I appreciate your homiletic style. I don't know. I think I'm still kind of, when I was a deacon, I was kind of figuring out what I'm doing. And
Mm-hmm.
I kind of try to focus on an image, is what they told us, kind of
Right.
pick a primary image and kind of relate all the readings to that. So I've almost found that actually like reading a good novel or seeing a good movie can
Mm-hmm.
actually do more than even just going through biblical commentaries and stuff. And
Right.
so oftentimes I find that that connects better with people if it's just not that it's just something relatable, but I think that
Mm-hmm.
those, there's a reason why good novels and good movies speak to us because it has a way of conveying a truth, I think. And we don't like, I think we think when we like when facts and just truths are just told to us plainly, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that's the case. I think you like when it's kind of wrapped up in mystery or wrapped up in a story.
Yeah.
And that's what I try to do. And I think it's working.
No, I think you're right. It's a great resource, and movies and television programs and books can be a great stepping off point. I think I probably related too many times, probably, to elements of It's a Wonderful Life or even Moonstruck as having teachable moments. And everyone's seen those movies, but did they see the spiritual values in it as well? Now, having come of age in the past 20 years and entering the seminary and getting ordained, I have to ask you this. I asked you once of Barbara Hall, who is a wonderful producer who gave us Madam Secretary and a bunch of other successful programs, Joan of Arcadia, but she came into the Catholic Church probably at some of the worst times of the public scandal. And I guess it makes me wonder, in her case and in your case, when everyone else is telling us what's wrong with the church and the mistakes that have been made and the sins that have been committed, you commit to an institution that is battle scarred. Um, how did you handle the knowledge of what was going on with the scandals, and what are we to learn from that, and how do we get better?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I've heard people getting upset or angry, and they should be.
Mm,
Um, it's funny though because 2002 is kind of the date that we associate with really the first huge wave of the
right.
sex abuse scandal, and I was 7 years old. I mean,
Well,
I was a vulnerable kid at that point. So I remember my parents talking to us about it, and it just seemed, because Father Tom Fusco was our pastor, he was such a good guy, so it was just
hmm
something that seemed foreign to us. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's another way that it's kind of funny how God works because there are guys I knew in the seminary who the abuse crisis almost it ignited a call in them that they felt like they wanted to be part of the change.
hmm
And not to say that my vocation didn't come that way, but I just felt a call to the priesthood, not necessarily as like trying to be a firefighter or a hero trying to run into the mess, but
Yeah.
I think it's just the way that God works, that he just continues to call people. Um, yeah, I don't know. People ask me like what is my part in trying to turn things around? And I like to say just trying my best to be a good and holy priest.
Right,
I
right.
mean, just try to do the job that unfortunately, that some men chose to kind of mar and scandal. So
hmm
I hope just by being, a genuine example of what God is really trying to do through the priest, I
Yeah.
hope that kind of is my little role in changing.
Father Christopher is our guest, and one of the things I get all the time is a question that I'm going to put to you as well. I say all the time that I don't understand the vocation shortage, if there is in fact one, because I've never not had a great day in priesthood. I just think we have an opportunity every single day to make a difference in people's lives, to do good things every day of your life. And yet there are some people who say to me, yeah, well, so does a social worker, so does a therapist, so does a doctor, so does a nurse, so does a firefighter, so does a police officer. Every day they're doing something good for others. Why can't you do good for others and still be a married man with kids? So when you get the inevitable second question to how did you know you wanted to be a priest is, how are you going to cope with the embrace of celibacy that's required of our priesthood? What do you say?
Yeah, and it's funny because I obviously I teach sophomores every day, so
Yeah.
it's a question that comes up right away.
Uh-huh.
Because they all, I mean, I'm young. I could go get married. A lot of my friends right now were in that
Yeah.
stage of their life. I tell the kid because I don't like when people use celibacy. The explanation that they give is, well, it's just something that's practical. It's like so that I have enough time to do my ministry, I can't have a family. Well, that's not really true because
Mm-hmm.
there are plenty of doctors that wake up late at night to go to the hospital and nurses that work night shifts. And truthfully, there are people whose jobs require a greater time commitment. So that can't be
Yeah.
it. And
Right.
I told my sophomores at least that, I mean, the way that we live it or cope with it, as you say, is it's supposed to be when it's lived right. That's why scandals were terrible for this image. When it's lived right, it's supposed to be an image to them of what our lives are supposed to be in heaven. I told my students that like if I'm doing this right, that you're supposed to see the way that we are in heaven, that my entire life is for God. Um, and it's hard when we're trying our best to live holy lives and almost do that imperfectly, but I think that's the way that I live it. And I joke sometimes too with even with my pastor now that they say, how do you deal with the loneliness? And I'm an introvert. I wish I had more alone time. It seems like in this work all we do is we see people and go, and it's like the alone time I cherish. So
Yeah. Father Christopher Hell is our guest, newly ordained. What was your date, June what?
what's that? June 18th.
June 18th, 2022, folks. So this is a recent wonderful addition to the Catholic family in terms of priesthood. Now, last week, our guest was Patrick Kelly, right?
Yeah, the Supreme
Patrick
Knight.
Kelly, the
Mhm.
Supreme Knight of the Knights of
Sure.
Columbus. I mention that because he's obviously an institutional man of the church and he's doing great things for the church. But for him and for us, when you're doing good stuff for the church and for people all the time, it becomes easy to use as an excuse. I have no time for, and one of the things that very often falls by the wayside is encounter with Christ, prayer time. when in your busy day and how in your busy day do you make time to remember that we're not only called to bring people to prayer, but we're supposed to pray ourselves?
Yeah, and I think I find that time is best in the morning. Usually, I'm kind of more of a morning person than a night person.
Okay.
So yeah, I try to, especially before the morning mass, to find that time to just, yeah, exactly. Like you can't give what you don't have, right? And
Right.
I find that if I don't pray well in the morning, it almost like it can affect the way I teach, or to kind of root everything in the relationship we have with Christ has to be central. So I try to every morning, not just to pray the office, but to have that time for just, contemplative prayer, to just speak to God as I tell the students and even the parishioners, to speak to him as you would a friend in an
Hmm.
honest way. And I'm not exempt from that. I mean, we all need it.
Yeah, less so now because I'm kind of home based, and I've mentioned to you before caring for my mom who's 102. But I
Right.
mention it because the experience I used to have was that I would travel around the country very often doing clergy conferences, and uh, one of the things that was I understood where they're coming from, but challenging for me was when people identify themselves by a particular papacy. I'm a John Paul priest, or I'm a Benedict priest, or I'm a Francis priest, and I lightly but seriously say, but we're all priests of Jesus Christ. I mention all this because there is a perception that in our church we have priests of different ideologies, left, right, middle. Is that real? And should it be real? And it's just an impression I have of you, but I think of you as a guy who's kind of squarely in the middle.
Yeah, I guess so. It's funny because is it real? I guess so. Insofar as people speak that way, it has to be
Yeah.
real.
Right.
Um, yeah, I just think that it's right to subscribe to an ideology, especially in church world. You can't use political language. So calling
Right.
somebody a liberal Catholic or conservative Catholic, it doesn't make any sense because
Yeah.
we just don't use political language in church world, or we're not supposed to really, because it really doesn't make sense. Yeah, I, I really don't subscribe, I guess, to a papacy. I mean, I've kind of been
Hmm.
influenced by the example of the popes in my lifetime, even John Paul II.
Hmm.
Um, it's funny, but one priest once said to me that if you look at the times in the church where there was crisis, which is almost all the time, the saints that made a difference in the church, sometimes lay people, sometimes priests, sometimes religious, oftentimes you actually can't name who the pope was at that time, and that's not
Right.
supposed to be disparaging to the pope. It's just supposed to be that rarely in history has that been so important. Usually, it's just individuals choosing to live their encounter with Christ in a real way. And to me, that's kind of the name of the game, especially right now. I mean,
Right.
that's what we have to do.
Father Christopher Hell is our guest, newly ordained priest of the Diocese of Rockville Centre. When I was very, very young, younger even than your 7-year-old story, Pope Pius XII was Pope. And along after his very austere, very holy man, but very austere personality came John the 23rd, who smiled and told jokes and was warm and engaging. Later on, Paul VI, a wonderful holy man, now a saint of the church, but again, very, very serious guy, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, followed by, just for a month, Pope John Paul I, who did something as simple as smiled and told great stories and enlightened people with joy. I mention that because in both cases, John the 23rd, John Paul II, for me, it actually was a source of invitation to think about the priesthood because I said these guys are in such a position to bring needful joy into the world. I mention that because I wonder, are you naturally given to being a joyous person? And when life can be overwhelming, when you look around at the sadnesses and the burdens that people carry, what do you do to get back on the horse? What do you do to get back to finding your joy?
Yeah, I don't know, naturally joyful. I guess it's part of being a
Yeah.
Christian, which I guess is a supernatural thing. But I'm more of an introvert. I'm not like somebody who's super outgoing, and I guess sometimes you could associate being outgoing with being joyful. But I guess I prefer to be like quietly joyful. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that people have to see it. I mean, especially the students. That's kind of my reference point these days. There's somebody who said, "Save me from sour-faced saints." Like we have to be joyful, or what we're. Oftentimes with Christianity, we just sometimes we know it's true, but we don't package it well, and
Yeah.
sometimes the packaging is just being joyfully an example of Christ. Right? That's how people will know that what we believe is true.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, of course, as a priest, there's the sorrowful moments, and in those times, uh, I think it's joy is also something that says that there's more than just this life, that there has to be hope. And
Hmm.
so even there's a difficult funeral, which in just being a priest a couple months I've already had.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there's a sense in which I hope to still kind of, I don't know, pervade joy through that moment, that even in that time, there's hope for a better life coming soon. And yeah, I don't know if I've quite mastered it yet, though. It's still all new to me,
Right,
obviously.
right, right.
But
And
I
take
think
the
I'm trying
time.
my best.
Take the time, please. As you know, we're supposed to teach as moral leaders, and we try our best to do that. But inevitably, the moral and the contemporary issues of our day are deeply intertwined. Issues of controversy, and you know what they are, whether it's about any aspect of the life issue, from capital punishment to abortion, talking about trying to address what's on people's minds in terms of open borders and the role of the church in helping those who are migrants trying to escape horrible situations, teachings on human sexuality. There's so many hot button issues out there. And I know we ought to preach the gospel, but it's kind of impossible, it seems to me, to preach the gospel without being aware that what people are talking about are many of these controversial issues. I know it's early in your time, but have you figured out an approach to how do I proclaim the moral teachings of the church, but not ignore the elephant in the room, the things that people are thinking about and talking about, the real issues of our day?
Yeah, and I think that I know the place where I've at least interacted with that before I even became a priest is just among family and friends. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you have any family is going to have people thinking different things about not just the church's moral teaching, but we all have different ways of interpreting things. And so that's, I think, people just, if you're living a Catholic life in any family today, anyone's gonna experience that.
Yeah.
I don't know. My approach would be, I like to say that I've heard it once said you want to have mystery before morality, and that's not to say that you put morality on the side, but no one's going to change his or her life for a Jesus they've never met. And so, in order for people to, you can't call, you can't just tell someone the church is teaching on contraception and expect them to change their life and their mind and everything that they're doing based on just what you're saying, even if it's true. They're going to change the way they're living based on a relationship and encounter they've had with Jesus. And that's the mystery part, and that has to come first always. I mean, so I think that's kind of the way we ought to be leading most of the time. If you let them encounter the mystery, Jesus is going to take care of the conversion of heart, I think, that has to come later.
Father Christopher Heller, as we mentioned, is at St. Dominic's Church in Oyster Bay, Long Island, New York. And even though you have a parish school and a religious ed program and a high school, and there are young parents, older parents who want to send their children to get their Catholic formation, you know and I know that in some cases, even a majority of those who send their kids for religious ed or to the Catholic school system are not themselves practicing. So I've said often enough, there's 168 hours in every week. We find the time to eat, to sleep, to be with people we think are important. We make time for what's a priority. What would you say to the parent who says, I want my kid to go to your program, to go to Catholic school, but the truth is we are Christmas and Easter Catholics. How do we get them back?
Yeah, and we experienced that in both of our schools for sure. And I think, in my opinion, at least, obviously the Sunday has to be central. But I think for a lot of our families, it's not. And it is truth. We have to be honest that it's not as easy as it once was, right? The world is not, it's not Christendom anymore.
Right.
Sundays are taken by a lot of things that wasn't. So it is harder for the family today to go to church than it was in the past. That's true. Yeah, and so it's a sacrifice. But I know families that go to church every Sunday. I know families that make it a priority, even with the difficulties surrounding it. And I think, in a way, too, it's part of our role, my role as a priest, to make the Sunday central. Think of the Eucharist right now. We're, I guess, going through a sort of Eucharistic revival, or trying to. And I think what is the one thing that we have to do as priests, or people in charge of parishes, is to make the experience of the Sunday Eucharist actually say that Jesus is present in the Eucharist. People will believe it if we make it seem like it's true, the way that we celebrate Mass, the way that we worship, to make it attractive to people to come to Mass on Sundays. So I think it's kind of both ends. We do have to preach the truth that Sunday is central, and the people's lives actually will be better. Their family life will be better if they focus on Sunday. But our end of the deal is then to make our celebration of the Eucharist to actually proclaim the truth that we believe, that this is the most important part of the week, and that Christ is actually present here. So I think
Father,
both things have to happen.
Father, one of the things people, I think, have a hard time getting their head around is something you did back in June. As part of the ordination rite, you put your hands in the hands of your bishop and you say, I promise you and your successors obedience and respect. In a world which does not prize obedience, and certainly not blind obedience, it's a concept that's beyond understanding. Wait a second, you're a young adult, and you're saying to this man who right now, Bishop Barris, wonderful guy, you're saying, okay, I place my life in your hands, but 20 years from now, 30 years from now, God willing, you're still a priest. Whoever that may be, you're saying, I promise you and your successors obedience and respect when you don't know even who that person will be. How hard is it for you, or was it ever hard for you, to have enough trust to say, yeah, I'll go with this promise of obedience, and I know it's a leap of faith, but I'm willing to make it?
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, it's funny because obedience is it's one of the only promises you make twice. You have to make it as a deacon and then again. And I actually taught my students about this the other day because I practiced with, I showed them, like, when I made this promise, I enclosed my hands in the bishop's hands. And at that moment, I said, like, why do you do that? Well, it's kind of symbolic. I couldn't move my hands. Somebody else is almost in control of my life.
Right.
And like you said, it's obedience to the church, not just to one person, but to the church and to her ministry. And in that sense, I almost find it to be something that's kind of freeing or life-giving. I told my students, like, I didn't choose to come here, but somehow in God's providence, this is an amazing place, and I'm very happy to be here. There's something about obedience. I think that there's certain things in your life that one would have to usually think of that almost become an adventure, just a way that, you're on the right path because somebody, Christ himself, the church, your bishop, I guess, chose it for you.
Last week I went to my high school reunion 52 years later, and so many of them would ask me, would you do this again? And I said without hesitancy, yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful life. And Father Christopher Heller, at the beginning of your priestly that's what I want for you. You have so many gifts. You're such a good guy, and you're so intelligent in terms of your presentation. But I just hope it's a rewarding, wonderful life, and that you can touch literally thousands and thousands of lives with the gifts that you've been given by God. And at the beginning of this process, this life, this embrace of the vocation, just know you give an old guy like me an awful lot of hope. Thank you so much for being on our program.
Thank you, Msgr. It's great, and I trust it'll be a good journey going forward.
As we end today's program, I want to thank you all for being with us. If you need to reach me, you can write me at personallyspeakingpodcast@gmail.com. You can also go to this show or past episodes by going on YouTube and searching under Personally Speaking with Monsignor Jim Lisante, where you'll be able to watch shows as well. And please don't forget to click like and subscribe. I'm privileged to serve as host and executive producer, Personally Speaking. Our producer is Lisa Jandovitz. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be with you again next time on Personally Speaking.